Yep. We have to. Yeah. Stop. Okay. All right. What the heck? For me, for me. Hope everybody's there. Morning, everyone. You made it.
Morning.
Good. Oh, hi, Chad. Are you on a plane? Oh my goodness.
No, just the Metro North plane, so much more
Oh,
domestic
straight.
than that.
Got it. All right, so it's 9:34. Let me share the agenda for the screen, and then David, are you ready to start?
Yes.
Okay, hang on one second. Okay, June, I'm not able to share. Hold on one second. Okay. Host and panelists. Yeah. I can't share. I just clicked host and panelists. Try it again. All right. I'm ready when you are, Mr. Feldon.
Okay, just make your screen a little bit bigger because you know what would be really helpful if would you mind sending a copy of this to me ahead of our meeting, even if it's 10 minutes before? Just
Sure.
that way I can read it off my screen. So, all right. So welcome everyone. It is Wednesday, February 12th. It's 9:35 a.m. This is the Weston Board of Education Curriculum Subcommittee. It looks like we have a quorum. So I'm calling the meeting to order. So just a couple of quick things. The purpose of the Board of Education Curriculum Subcommittee meeting is to collaborate between the Board of Education stakeholders and school safety leadership, school-based leadership. I've only had half a cup of coffee so far. I apologize. I will get better momentarily. To discuss all aspects of curriculum, instruction, school culture, and climate in the Weston Public Schools. Some of our virtual norms: let's keep our cameras on at all times, mute our microphones just so we don't have a lot of background noise, be present and engaged, seek to understand, and keep the discussion and comments to the topic so we can get through our agenda. Now I will turn it over to you, Tina. Oh, wait, sorry, we have to do our minute approval. So I have this ready to go. Just give me a moment. So we have Chad and Tina the minutes were distributed through board book and email. Did you have a chance to review them and any questions? All right. I see Lisa shaking her head and Chad seems like he's shaking his head. Excellent. Okay. So in that case, can I get a motion to approve our January meeting minutes?
So moved.
All right. So I will second that. And now we can move on to the real nuts and bolts of our meeting. Tina, take it
Excellent.
away.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. For those of you that aren't aware, we are on a 2-hour delay, so we are going to reorganize some of the agenda items just so that our high school staff can participate in the agenda and then they can go back to class. And then we will be joined by some of our elementary level teachers and CILs who will be presenting at the end. So just wanted to give you a little flavor for some of the change in organization on the agenda. First, I'm going to do some curriculum updates. Shauna Johnson is here. She is our curriculum and instruction leader from the middle school and the high school. She also teaches, right? So she's a 0.5 CIL and a 0.5 teacher. She is going to give us an update regarding the events of the Holocaust Remembrance Day that we celebrated and honored back in January. She was the one who organized and helped lead those events between the middle and the high school. So Shauna, thank you for joining us and jumping on so early.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me. And thank you for all of the suggestions and resources that you had sent me from previous meetings. So we had our event on January 27th, which is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. We had events at the middle school and the high school. So our middle school students heard speakers. We had planned on having 3 different speakers, 6th grade having the theme of stories of survivors, 7th grade hearing from Rabbi Freeman and talking about symbols, and 8th grade hearing from the Jewish Student Union. So they can hear from their peers, but also so that the Jewish Student Union can kind of share what they do here in the high school, and then hopefully have some of those 8th graders transitioning to 9th grade join the Jewish Student Union as well. Unfortunately, Rabbi Freeman got sick and wasn't able to join us, but the kids did an amazing job and were able to pivot. And so the JSU actually presented to the 7th and 8th grade, and they did a fantastic job. They were super engaging. The kids were really into what they were saying. They were invested. We even gave out some stickers and pins from the event that we had previously here at the high school, where the No Place for Hate, the blue square with a hashtag. And so the kids were coming back and asking if we had some more pins, and they were wearing them really proudly. So they did a really nice job. And our middle schoolers actually wrote thank you cards as well to the JSU. And so I've delivered those to them. And then at the high school, we had our speakers move from the middle school to the high school. And we had Andy, who is our Holocaust survivor, speak to our 10th grade in the library. He's done that previously. And so he continued to do that again. And the kids had some really good feedback on it. Some of them were talking about the levels of anti-Semitism and prejudice against minorities in our country today are incredibly high. And we have to do our part as witnesses to stand up against hate. They also were talking about how the word hate has a lot of meaning behind it, and how people are in society today use it too lightly. And so they had given us feedback. Our high school students had given us feedback on all the presentations, and that was some from Andy's. We also had the daughter of the survivors speak to our period 6 group. And then again, Rabbi Freeman was unable to join us, unfortunately, but I'm sure he'll join us another time. And then in period 8, we had a daughter of a survivor and a university professor from Fairfield University. He's a professor of Judaic studies, which was a nice pairing. We had wanted to do a narrative and an academic together. And thinking about moving forward and what this is going to look like next year, we're going to adjust our timeframes so that we can really allow for these important messages to kind of sink in and not rush the kids with the timing because of the end of periods, and allow them more opportunities to ask questions. And that was some of their feedback to us, is that they didn't want to feel rushed, that they really wanted to like sit and invest their time and really learn and then ask follow-up questions. But they had a lot of really good feedback for us and learning experiences that they gained.
Great job, Shauna. Shauna is new this year, and she really did a great job of combining some of the events and the experiences that we've done in the past and trying to make every new school year for the students unique and participate in an alternate presentation so that it wasn't redundant. And so that's what Shauna is talking about. Now we're at a point where we have a repertoire of resources that we can look at a 6 through 12 unique experience depending on which grade level they're at as they progress from middle school to high school, which is a really a great thing. And Shauna's really doing a great job putting that together. Are there any questions for Shauna or Megan since they're both on the call?
I have a question or two. So this is something that's been important to me, that we bring Holocaust remembrance into the schools. And I've always tied it to not just because I'm Jewish, but because I think the things that we're seeing in our district with anti-Semitism, they come from a place of not understanding. I believe that we're in a great school district. I believe that we've got kids that are not rotten to the core. I think they don't know, they don't understand, and they're impulsive, right? So they do stupid things. That said, Shauna, I'm really grateful that you're here. I've been pushing for, this is now the third, I think, Holocaust remembrance that I've really said I want to see something actively done, actively scheduled. The feedback that I got is that at the high school, you had to, unless you were in 10th grade, you would have had to skip a class to participate. And that, I think, at the end of the day, caused, I can't quantify it, but I can give you some subtle feedback I got. It was not a good, given the two choices, the choice of skipping was the lesser of two evils, I guess. So many kids that might have been interested. So how do we solve for that next year so that they don't have to make that choice?
Yes, and that was something else that we were looking into. It wasn't skipping, so they were marked as field trip, and we had given all their names to their teachers. We made it available. We let the teachers know that any child can join this any of these presentations. But yes, I understand that some of them may have chemistry and they don't want to miss chemistry because they don't want to get behind. And I totally get that. And so now they're drawn between these two things. So moving forward and next year, we're going to change it and do it more like an assembly so that students don't get drawn. Do I go to class or do I go to this? Both these things are really important to me. So they don't have to make those choices, that it's just available to them, and it'll be available to all students.
Okay. And what are we doing to potentially introduce age appropriate material at the lower grades?
So I have gotten those resources from the Cantor that you have sent me, and I did pass them on, but we didn't have enough time to really dive into them. And so my hope is between now and next year, next January, is that we're able to kind of sift through all those resources and make it a really concentrated and very focused, age appropriate lessons for kids across.
And I think, David, we've talked about this many, many times, right? We want to make sure that the messaging at K-5 is not just about surrounding the Holocaust Remembrance Day in itself, right? This is about how we treat each other. This is about those hate crimes that we're talking about that we don't tolerate, and the educational aspect that we want to ensure we are explicitly teaching through a lot of our social emotional curriculum beyond just social studies, right? And so I think, yes, as a district, when we have our district committees around social studies, our district committees around literacy, that's where we may need to name some of those more explicitly and weave in some of our additional resources, such as our counselors and social workers at the lower grades, to help us ensure that the text and the lessons that we choose are really elevated in those areas. I think we do a good job. Maybe we don't name it as explicitly within a core academic area. And it's not an assembly type of thing, because especially in the K-5 realm, it's all about learning how to treat each other and being kind and relationships and language, like all of those things that we talk at the middle school, but and high school, but it's a whole new connotation. And the language is different in K-5. So we just need to be mindful, and we are always evolving and looking for better resources to help us with those messages.
Okay. Yeah. So I will be persistent, and I will look forward to having this conversation a year from now and saying we did better, but we do more each year. And at the end of the day, that should be our goal. And yeah, I would look forward to what we do at the lower levels. And just want to say one more quick thing, which is let's not dilute what the Holocaust was by mixing too much of non-Holocaust things into that same day. I understand if we lead up to that or as a theme, hate and stuff like that, but for Holocaust remembrance, I think we should not dilute the day with too many things that are not Holocaust specific.
Agreed.
If you're looking to extend it next year, you might want to include parents. It's an opportunity to present an important subject and to the parents so they know what's going on in the school, and they're presented with the same subject matter so they can discuss an important topic as a family as well within the school.
Actually, Lisa and I were talking about that as well, of involving or maybe doing a parent night or a parent webinar where we can extend what the students learned in the day, maybe
Yeah.
during the evening. So the education is not just for students, but it's for all families from all different religions. And so the perspective is now broadened. So point well taken. We did talk about it as well. So as David said,
Okay.
with every year we have a 10% improvement and change over our programming. So definitely on the docket for next year as well.
I'll ask just one question. Can you hear me okay, everyone, or not? Yeah? Okay. I just would put a little underline under what a lot of David was saying. And in particular, I want to emphasize that given that we are an educational institution, the ways that this can be woven into a history education, education of the facts, education of the circumstances, given that nihilism is essentially an awaiting of fact. These things happen. So we have to assume and hope that as people get educated, that the actual acquisition of knowledge is part of what makes them kinder and gravitate towards some of the social emotional learning. So agreed on the idea of making sure we're teaching the events, actual historical events of what happened, not just framing it in the context of social and emotional well-being and being kind and turning away from hate and things like that. Sort of in the whole like knowledge shall set.
Yeah, and I can kind of speak to a little bit of that. In the middle school, all of the students got lessons prior to their speaker, and those lessons were specifically aligned with whatever the theme was for those speakers. And in terms of high school here, the 10th grade curriculum is pretty robust, and they do a really good job of giving the World War I, the post-war, the interwar period, the World War II period, and post-World War II. So they do get a comprehensive historical education. And so when Andy came in as our Holocaust survivor, and he was able kind of to speak to more of those things that they had studied on an academic level, but also to your point as well, which is why I wanted to bring in and have Rabbi Friedman and the professor to give more of that historical and broader picture of the events leading up to and after, not just those personal stories, so that the kids would have more of a well-rounded understanding.
Great. Thank you, Shauna. Appreciate your time and all your efforts around these events. Great job.
Thanks.
You're-
I'm gonna go teach.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Great. All right. So on that idea of climate and social emotional well-being, we've been doing a lot of work in the district, across the district with our climate surveys. Last month we presented on the community data, and this month we, as an added layer of some of our school climate goals in the district, we're joined by Dr. Brandon Wiley. He is from Challenge Success, and Megan has been working very closely, and her staff very closely with him on an added layer of school climate and data related to a variety of different aspects of health and mental well-being from staff and students and parent representatives. So I'm going to have Megan do the formal introductions. We do have some teachers with us as well, and I will cue up Dr. Wiley's presentation, and I'll let you guys take it from here. Welcome.
Thanks, Tina. So as Tina said, we contracted with Challenge Success at the beginning of the year. So we have embraced the high school partnership with the Challenge Success organization, which is a research-based organization out of Stanford University. You've heard me speak of them before. And their three main tenets are really to improve student engagement, well-being, and belonging. And that really aligns to our core values and the work that we're doing through our school climate committee and our school climate work. Both reflective of the survey that Brandon will talk to. that we provided to students, families, and our staff. As you know, we also surveyed them through the Panorama survey. What's nice about the Challenge Success survey is it did give us a little bit more detail and insight in kind of the day-to-day workings of kids and families and staff and how we're feeling around different topics that Brandon will get into, whether it's, stress related to assessment, maybe it's, cell phones and kind of where kids are keeping their phones at night and some of those details, how they're when they resort to kind of academic integrity issues and stuff like that. So Brandon will present to that in a moment. I'm also here joining us is Lucas Walker. Mr. Walker is one of our teachers who are on our smaller Challenge Success Committee. So at the high school, we have a school climate committee that meets monthly that we invite, and that's really more of a drop-in. Like parents can come. It's we've just set our dates for the rest of the year, the second Tuesday of every month after school. Parents can join, students join, and we really have a robust group of teachers join those meetings. Mr. Walker is a part of our smaller Challenge Success team that is made up of 3 students, 4 parents, 4 teachers, and myself to really hone in on the data and really be reflective of the kind of things we want to maybe pilot this year and move towards growth in certain domains and areas based on the feedback, really with the main focus on the feedback from students right now. And we're getting to the point where we're also going to be reviewing that staff and family data as we move through the spring. So without further ado, this is Dr. Brandon Wiley, who's been a great coach for us this year, and we're really excited to be doing this work.
Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be with you. I am calling in from Las Vegas, Nevada. It's a little bit earlier here, but it's also a lot colder than people expect. I think it's 43 degrees, I think, this morning. It does get this cold here, believe it. Oh, actually, sorry, 31. Sorry, I misread it. Not quite as cold as where you are, I'm sure, but it's a pleasure to join you. And today, what I was just hoping to do is give a brief overview of the partnership that we have with Weston High School. As Megan has said, Challenge Success is based at Stanford University in partnership with the Graduate School of Education. For over nearly 20 years, a little over 20 years now, Challenge Success has been partnering with schools all over the United States, over 350 schools, middle and high schools at this point, to really help them understand the culture within their school as it relates to belonging, well-being, and engagement of their students. I serve as a school partnership coach, but my day job actually is as Chief Academic Officer of a pre-K through grade 8 school here in Las Vegas. So my Challenge Success partnership is sort of a side job that I'm doing, but I've been working with Challenge Success since 2017. Our school in particular has partnered with them. So I have this sort of unique perspective of living it every day with our teachers and students, while also being able to work with amazing schools like Weston High School to help interrogate sort of what that lived experience of students looks like. So what I'll just say on the high level, we could probably skip ahead to maybe 2 slides ahead if you don't mind, is this idea that well-being, engagement, and belonging are intrinsically linked in terms of student success. The name Challenge Success comes from this idea that for many, many decades, we've been defining success as a country as test scores, rankings, college admissions, really what considered to be very high pressure, high stakes metrics. But the reality is that for some of our students, those metrics are not how they're going to define their success in life. And so we want to broaden the definition of what success looks like and challenge those notions. And so I'll talk a little bit in the context of your data, what we're learning about your students in particular. This is not to say that high academic rigor and achievement isn't important, but what we know is that when students come to school and they're not well, they're not physically, mentally, emotionally well, they're not going to perform academically at the highest levels that are possible. Likewise, if they come into a school community where they don't have a sense of belonging, they don't see other students who look like them, who think like them, they don't feel loved on, they don't feel included, they also are not going to attain their highest academic achievement. And then lastly, this idea of engagement, our co-founder, Dr. Denise Pope, what she learned through her doctoral dissertation over 20 years ago is that kids are doing school. They're coming to school, they're sort of going through the motions, but they're not seeing the purpose in the learning, and they're not seeing authentic applications of that learning, right? So if their goal of success is just to get test score grades that are high enough so that I can get the grades that I want, so that I can get into college, so that I can get a high paying job, That is one pathway, but it's not the pathway for all students. So we want to really understand where students are to be able to meet them where they are, to personalize the experience to the extent possible to help them be the best versions of themselves. So what I'm happy to share is that in this data, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, we've now surveyed over 350,000 middle and high school students. So it's a fairly robust data set from around the country. Over 500 schools have engaged in the survey. Around 350 schools have partnered with us in a deeper way, as Weston High School has. And we're looking at a variety of measures. What we've shared with you today in the form of this PDF is a sliver of the data. There is a dashboard that gives a very robust way for us to look at all these different metrics, disaggregate the data, look at subgroups of students, look at grade levels, look at it by gender. And I'm sure Megan would be happy to share that with you at some other time. What I want to do is just give you a few highlights of what we found in the data, and then I'd love for the team to talk about what their follow-up actions are. The idea here is that we are trying to use the data and the voice of our students to mobilize, to react to sort of what their experience is and what we already know about the school. So on the next slide, if you don't mind, again, just some of the metrics we're looking for, things around well-being, engagement, belonging. We ask questions about things like homework, how much sleep you're getting, how engaged you are in extracurriculars, and then what's the disconnect or connect between what your parents are expecting and what you're expecting of yourself. What we're finding nationwide is that kids are overbooked, they're not getting enough sleep, they're becoming relatively disengaged in many of our high schools around the country. And unfortunately, other things are impacting their mental health, their physical health. So what we're trying to understand is what are the things that are contributing or hindering to their success? How can we as a school control for some of those things, knowing that there's a lot of other factors, obviously, in the world right now impacting kids? So we had nearly 650 students take the survey. If we could go to the next slide, please. Next slide again. So I'm going to start just in some general categories. Before I even get into the data, I just want to give you a few headlines that I think are exciting. One is that students overwhelmingly reported that there were strong support systems within the school. So across all the metrics, about 90% of the students said that they felt supported in some way, or if they needed support, they could find that support within the school. That is pretty astounding, that number being so high. So I think there are definitely some systems and certainly the people within the school making a big difference in helping kids feel supported. And a little bit later, I'll talk about the percentage of kids who have an adult they feel like they can go to and a student they can go to. So in general, the headline is, teachers are accessible and they're a trusted resource for your students. The other piece that I think is interesting is that about 90% of your students reported being behaviorally engaged. What that means is that, they're completing their assignments, they're putting effort into their work. They don't always necessarily see the purpose behind some of the work. So we'll get into that in a second. But I think this is just speaks to the strong work ethic of your students and of your community and of the expectations that are placed on students. And then the last sort of headline that I have before I get into the details here is the culture. Students use words like fun, interesting, academically rigorous. Those might sometimes feel a little bit at odds with one another, but I think it's sometimes unusual for us in the survey data to hear high school kids say fun or exciting or interesting. So I think there are elements that are taking place in the high school that are causing students to want to come to school, to want to engage. But as always, all schools, there's room for growth. And that's what I want to really focus on in these next couple slides. So one area that we know for sure, the research is clear, is that kids in this country are not getting enough sleep. And this is happening for a variety of reasons. Again, some of it is because they're overprogrammed, they're involved in a lot of extracurriculars. In fact, your kids reported on average upwards of 11 hours of extracurricular time over a course of a given week. So if you think about that's a lot of time, and that's not even before they go home and have to start their homework. Right. And so as we think about how do we help kids, find that balance, thinking about how we're offering things, when we're offering things is one of them. Your kids reported that on average, they're getting 6.8 hours of sleep a night. That's 2.2 hours less than what is recommended by, pediatricians and the field of the medical field in terms of what they need to get. However, unfortunately, they're actually pretty close to the national average in our survey nationwide. One other question that we asked that's interesting is 84% of your kids report that they keep their cell phones in their rooms. So one of the reasons we asked that question is because we know that when cell phones are, by your bed and they're dinging, they're going off, or even the thought that someone might be texting you or trying to communicate with you actually subliminally reduces the likelihood that students are going to get deep REM sleep. And so this is just something we're trying to, we get the data and we try to get under the surface to understand some of the causality, what's causing some of these behaviors, some of these feelings, some of these outcomes. And so one of the things we're very interested in right now as an organization is technology and the impact technology is having on our youth. If we can go to the next slide, please. And I'm going through this very fast, so feel free at any point to stop me, but I will pause and see if we have any questions before the team also talks about what they're doing. We ask kids things like, what's causing you stress? Stress is not necessarily a bad thing, right? We all have it in our lives. We want to help kids, though, develop the coping skills and mechanisms to be able to deal with stress and advocate for themselves when they need assistance. So unsurprisingly, nationwide, this tends to be the trend. Grades, tests, quizzes, finals, assessments in general is the number one stressor. So what we try to understand is what about those things is causing you stress? Is it the way that they're reported? Is it the access you have to these things, the amount that you have? Like we try to get under the surface after the survey to find those things out. Overall workload, lack of sleep, procrastination or time management, again, being some of the top elements. So the team, I'm sure when I'm done, will talk a little bit about some listening in protocols that they're going to be engaging in, because the data doesn't tell us all the story. It tells us part of the story. And now our job is to really talk with kids further to better understand what the data says. Next slide, please. This is the one that I want to really raise for this group in particular, that 87% of your students reported that in the last month, they had at least one stress-related health symptom. Now, as I said, stress is not always a bad thing. Sometimes it can be a motivator. Sometimes it can actually help get kids focused. Where it becomes a problem is when there's maladaptive coping mechanisms, right? Or outcomes that hinder a student's ability to be successful. So this number is a little bit high compared to what we see nationwide. In fact, it's 7% higher than our 2-year average across the country. So kids are reporting things like exhaustion, difficulty sleeping, headaches, because they're not able to, in a healthy way, cope with the stress that they're feeling. So this is something we really want to focus on and try to better understand. How do they define stress? What are the symptoms that manifest when they're feeling it? But more importantly, what are the strategies they're employing to sort of de-escalate that stress? Or again, to get the help that they need when they need it. Next slide, please. We'll go to the next slide. All right, so this comes back. So that was a little bit, just a few headlines about wellness. There's a lot more we could go into, but for sake of time, I'll move on. Belonging. Again, we want students to be able to come to their school and feel as if it's a safe place, that they're understood, they're seen, they're valued, they're loved. And so in this case, 73% of your students reported that they had at least one adult in the high school if they had a problem that they could go to. And 86% of them said they at least had another student that they could go to. Now, on the first glance of this, you might say, that's okay, but what about the other 27%? What's happening there, right? To be honest, when we see numbers in the 70s or higher for a high school, that's actually a good indicator that you're heading in the right direction. Of course, our goal is we want every kid to feel loved. We want every kid to feel like they belong. So part of our job with the team now is to kind of unpack for the kids who do feel that, where are they going? Who are they accessing? Where are those safe spots in the school? But those that aren't feeling it, what's up with that, right? Well, why aren't they feeling a sense of connection to someone so that if they do have a need, they have someone to go to? And interestingly, more than half of your students said that their go-to person was a school counselor, the psychologist, or social worker, which I think is a huge win for that team in particular, that more than half of your kids see them as a go-to person. But the reality is all adults within the school, regardless whether they're teaching faculty, in the lunchroom, whoever is interacting with students, need to be seen as potentially the people that they could go to. All right, next slide, please. And again, we ask a series of questions. We don't ask kids like, do you feel belonging at school, right? That's not a yes, no question. We ask a series of questions that indicate the types of experiences and behaviors students would experience. And then we sort of aggregate that data to come up with that sort of sense of belonging metric. So we ask things like, do you feel like teachers treat students with respect? Do you feel that teachers help you with homework? Right? These are indicators that teachers are making an effort to support students and that students are seeing that support. Again, I think fairly high numbers for things like the respect, homework support, but for all of these areas, we're always looking to see what more could we do? Are there policies? Are there practices? Can we be more consistent across the school to sort of move the needle on improving these metrics? Next slide, please. Again, some more examples of questions that we ask around belonging. Do you feel accepted at the school? Other students like me the way I am? Do I feel like I'm a real part of this school? I will say that for some of these areas, I would personally like to see these numbers a little higher, right? And I think part of our job in this next sort of round of work is to understand what might be limiting students' ability to feel a stronger sense of belonging in school. And I want to be really honest, we're also talking about adolescence. It's a messy time, right? And so we can make a ton of effort as a school, but for some of our kids, we're never going to quite meet them exactly where they are, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And so again, the data, again, doesn't tell us all the answers or all the story. We need to dig in a little bit deeper to better understand it. And that's where some of the listening strategies will come in. Next slide, please. And I'm going to finish with engagement. So we ask students a series of questions about how they feel engaged in their class. And interestingly, and you can ignore the minus, that's a typo on your slide here. There's no comparisons here. But the idea here is how do we look at the percentages of students who are feeling engaged in doing school? So most of your kids, about a little more than half, sort of reported what we would call doing school. So what that means is they are doing the assignments, they're coming prepared, they're engaged, I would say they're compliant. But what we're really looking for is this idea of purposeful engagement or fully engaged. If you can go to the next slide, I think it'll better explain some of these. So the types of engagement, fully engaged, are students that are behaviorally, cognitively, and effectively engaged. So I'll just kind of break those down. Behaviorally is, again, you're doing what I'm asking you to do as a teacher, you're turning in your homework, you're on top of your work. The next cognitively is that we are meeting you where you are cognitively. You're feeling challenge, you're feeling like that it's stretching you, it's developmentally appropriate for you versus like it being too easy or being bored by the learning. And then the last one, affective, means that you see purpose in the learning. You find enjoyment in it, there's some connection, and you're finding it relevant to your life. Our goal is to find all three of those things. We want you to do the work that you're being asked to do and be on top of your work. We want you to be academically challenged, cognitively so. And then effectively, we want you to see some purpose in the learning, right? We don't want you to just do school. So again, as we break down the metrics, 90% of your students were able to check a lot of the boxes that would describe them as behaviorally engaged. They're on top of their work, they're doing what's asked of them. But about 35% of them felt that they were cognitively engaged, and only 12% said that they were effectively engaged. And when we looked at all three of those, a little less than 10% of your kids checked the box for all three of those things. So again, this is not atypical. I would say the affectively and the fully engaged are a little bit lower than what we're seeing across the nation. But we are seeing in general in high schools, kids are not seeing the purpose in their learning. They're feeling like they're jumping through hoops. They're compliant, they're doing what's assigned to them, but they're really not understanding the broader connection and how it's going to connect to their lives, beyond high school. Next slide, please. And again, these are just some examples of questions that we ask. Things like how often you complete your homework, how much effort you put into your schoolwork, how often you try as hard as you can. And again, if students see the relevancy and the purpose in the work, they're more likely to be motivated to do the work well and to turn in their best quality work. Next slide, please. Cognitive, these are, again, some of the metrics. Schoolworks helps you deepen your understanding or skills. It's useful in preparation for your future. So this comes down to, have teachers really clearly communicated again to students the purpose for why we're doing the learning and how they might apply that learning in future. Or better yet, how is the learning connected to something authentic now? Are we doing something for the world outside of our high school? Am I creating work for an audience beyond my classroom teacher? That's what makes the work more relevant for some of the students, which is the final slide around affective. And again, things like, how often do you have fun in your class? How often do you find your schoolwork interesting? And how often do you enjoy your schoolwork? So again, these are metrics that while they seem very low, what we're trying to do is think about what are some slight shifts, moves, both in curriculum and instruction that actually makes the learning more relevant and engaging for students. So I'm going to stop there because this was a lot of information. Homework. Just last thing I want to finish on homework. We are very interested in homework in the sense of not only how much homework students are getting, but the relevance of that work. So I just want to say something that might be controversial. There is a misnomer in this country that more work is better for kids. But what the research is very clear on is there's a difference between load and rigor. Load is the amount of work kids are doing, the amount of work they're asked. Rigor is really around the academic challenge that work. What we're really focused on in an organization is helping schools think about not necessarily more homework, but how do we make the homework that's assigned quality? So quality over quantity being the real key. And so what we're going to be working with Weston High School is to think about what are we assigning? How are we assigning it? How can we be more calibrated as faculty to make sure that we're just not piling things on? Because what we know is that's what's adding to some of the stress. And it's actually diminishing the quality of the work that students are producing. It's not increasing it. So, we ask questions about how much homework you have. And so students are reporting on average about 2.3 hours of homework a night. Now, keep in mind, that's in addition to the extracurriculars and the other commitments. Some of them might have jobs. And so when you think about sort of that pie of how many hours in a day, it's no wonder that some of our kids are getting less and less sleep. And they're having sort of what I would call this loyalty conflict of, do I do my homework or do I go to sports? Do I spend time on this with my family? And so as teenagers, I don't know that they always make good decisions. And so part of what we need to do is help make those decisions fewer and easier to make. Now I'll stop.
I'll jump in with a couple of questions, but also I
Sure,
don't
please.
want to move this along if there's other flow you want to get into another agenda. So I'll put the question back to you, and also I guess Tina as well. Is it okay to jump into questions now, or do you want to sort of save them for a certain period?
I would just ask, is there anything that Lucas wants to add on to Dr. Wiley's comments? Maybe talk about how this work is now translating into the climate of the school. Maybe Lucas could just round it out. I want to value his time that he came.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, my major takeaway from participating in this process is that I have really appreciated the method that Challenge Success has shared with us of starting with data and then using that to motivate meaningful conversations about the school experience, and particularly about the student experience. One of the things that really struck me when I went to the Challenge Success conference in the fall was the experience of talking with students just as people about their experience on a day-to-day basis. And I've had a similar experience when we've gotten together in the small group with that select group of students and also parents that you just don't get, or that I personally have not had when I talk with my students in the classroom or even with my advisory groups. We haven't really gotten to that point where we're relating on that level of really trying to understand each other's experience. And I think it's really important how Challenge Success focuses on getting all of the different stakeholders together to try and discuss the data and kind of come together on sort of like what our shared story is. The one specific example about that was, so we're thinking about, so one of the things that you heard Brandon say that I think is really true is that the data is the starting point. And now we need to also engage students and hear what they have to say about those survey results. So one of the strategies that we're going to be employing soon is giving some teachers the opportunity to shadow a student during the day, so we can kind of get that feel for what their day-to-day experience is really like, something that you don't see as a teacher. You just, especially at the high school level, right? You see them for that one small sliver of the day, and you don't sort of have a concept. I mean, you have an idea, but you don't really have a visceral concept of what their how that slice fits into their overall experience. And when we were talking about implementing that, one of the students actually stepped in, raised his hand, and said, actually, that sounds kind of creepy to me. And the way that he was hearing it was that we were going to be following the student and watching the student rather than sort of seeing through the student's eyes. And so he was able to come up with some ways for us to talk about it that he could agree that, like, actually, that does sound like a good idea, something that I would want teachers to see. And we also had a parent in the group who came in and at just our very last meeting, this is after I think maybe 3 total in-person meetings, that at our last meeting, he said, you know what, I came into this experience with certain preconceived notions or perceptions or ideas about what I thought the problems were at Weston High School. And I've really changed my opinion on those things as a result of hearing directly from teachers and from students. So it's those, I think it's that conversation, those relationships, I think that's what I think is the most valuable part about the challenge success process. And that is what I hope that as we continue to do our work, we're able to bring that experience to a more expanded group of people. If that sort of dialogue, if that culture is something that's able to permeate the rest of the school, then I think we can all be on the same page about maybe changes that could be made. So I think that's probably the most important thing. That's what I wanted to say.
Tina,
Thank
before we get to questions, I would just add that this work is also leading us into using our professional development, our professional learning days really intentionally. And Brandon is coming for the day on February 24th, which is one of our professional learning days as we return from our vacation. He's running an engagement workshop, teaching for engagement. And we're very excited about that. We think it directly correlates to the data that we're seeing. So to present teachers with some new ideas and also provide them some data that's really related to our school. Additionally, in the afternoon, we've highlighted 6 areas that we feel like we can make some moves in. So the topic of homework, grading and assessment, how we're effectively or ineffectively sometimes using PowerSchool, and what kind of stress that might be creating, academic integrity and AI, and how AI is influencing our academic integrity policies and practices. So those topics have really come directly out of the data and the conversations, not only at the Challenge Success team, but also our school climate team. And we're going to be in small, what we're calling action groups with our teachers to really dive into the research. We have facilitators in each of those rooms, and for those groups of teachers to make recommendations on how we want to proceed. And then those recommendations will then be provided to our program council, which is our leadership team, to see, and to our school climate, our Challenge Success team. Sorry, we have a lot of teams here. To really identify the things that are actionable in this semester, to create some change for our kids and for our teachers, because we are also recognizing workload stressors among our teachers too, when we really want to be mindful of the idea of teacher burnout, not only here, but we know that that's kind of a national concern as well. So I think it's really helped us to be really focused and intentional in our work going forward as well, which is great. So Brandon's going to come and do the Teaching for Engagement workshop and be here on the 24th. We're also looking to do another student well-being virtual workshop that Challenge Success will host virtually. We had really great reviews from parents, and we think pivoting to a virtual workshop rather than the in-person workshop when we did it last year, we'll get some great viewership, and we'll do a lot to promote that as well. It's a great conversation.
Amazing. Chad, do you want to ask your questions? Is this a good time?
Again, it's really up to you. I don't want to sidetrack things, but I have some questions on this, and it's really phenomenal data. So do you want to do questions now, or should I keep quiet and you sign in?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, my first reaction, but first of all, can everyone hear me okay? I heard his headset on for your sake, but if it sounds bad, I'll just take it off and speak into the audio of the phone.
We're going to try to decipher. It is a little hard to hear you.
Well, then let me switch. So I'll switch. So at least everyone's fine if you can't hear me.
David or Lisa, do you have any questions while we wait for Chad to switch over?
I do have quite a few questions, but Lisa, if you have questions as Chad switch, oh, we got Chad.
I'm so sorry for technical difficulties. Can you still hear me or not?
Yes, that's much
Okay.
better.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Everyone's waiting on me. I really apologize. The first thing I wanted to say is thank you. This data is really interesting and useful to look at. So thank you so much. And this is exactly some of what I've been asking about over the last 2-3 years is how are we looking at our district's well-being and our students' well-being beyond just test scores. So the first call out is just thank you. It's really useful and instructive. One of my first questions is not going to surprise anybody, but to me, this looks like a very clear call to action of we should get cell phones out of the high school as well. And I would be interested in your response to that, given 86% of kids sleeping with phones in their rooms, 6.8 hours of sleep per night. Both of those two things are correlated with chronic stress and mental health issues. And the data on cell phones is really witness what they're talking about doing in California and the LA school district and others. So one just very blunt, straightforward question is, isn't this a call to action to get the cell phone restrictions we put in the lower 3 schools into the high school as well?
So Chad, that is actually one of our, I left that off the list. That's one of our 6 topics that we are discussing in those action groups when we return from vacation. And I did share in the week ahead with families that, 84% of our students are sleeping with their phones. And we also are, we have some practices that exist at the high school. And so that they're not out during instructional time. We also know that we are a bring your own device school and that the MacBooks, which are so popular, also have that messaging feature. So we really just want to make sure that we're really mindful and that the policies, rules, whatever we're putting into a handbook or policy is really practical and I guess realistic for the population of, 13, 14 to 18-year-olds that we have in a high school building. So yes, we recognize that cell phones are intrusive. We recognize that there are components of cell phone use that are absolutely unhealthy, but then looking at how we really address it to effectively manage it and to make sure that they are a pro-social experience for kids, right, rather than the alternative. Brandon, I don't know if you want to chime in.
I'll just chime in to say that, nationwide, this is a hot button question. So I appreciate the question, Chad. I'm seeing schools go in 2 different directions. One is a more stark sort of lock it down, take the phones away, lock them away for the day. And I think developmentally through middle school, that makes a lot of sense. My school in particular, middle school, the kids come in the advisory, they lock up their phone in the morning, and they get it at the end of the day. But what we're seeing is students are savvy. They are using other technology aside from their phone to do some of the things we would prefer they not do with their phone, right? So the one-to-one computing, for example. So what I'm seeing more schools do, particularly high schools, is look at like what are some pilots or things we can do to mitigate the use of technology while at the same time educating students about some of the dangers of technology, addiction, some of the negative things that are happening, bullying, et cetera, online. Because at the end of the day, when they leave us in high school, they're going to be responsible for their behavior, right? Even before they leave us, they're responsible for their behavior. So there's 2 very different approaches. And I think part of what we'll do when we have the subgroup is like explore all the different options and talk about what are the things that are impacting engagement. If cell phones and technology are one of those things, then we want to pilot some things to address that. If that isn't the issue, we want to get at the core of what the issue is. So the answer to your question is maybe, right? I think this is where we need to do a little more digging. I think it's a little more nuanced when you get into high schools because of the age of the students, trying to teach those pro-social behaviors, but at the same time realizing that it is impacting kids. Even if their phone is not in their hand, they're thinking about it on some level.
Yeah, well, you bring up a lot of excellent points, and a bunch of the things you say, I think, does deserve much deeper looking for sure. The one obvious question you ask is it affecting engagement? I think the data, like the data, is in on this experiment we've run on our kids for the last 10 years, which is phones are bad for our kids' engagement. They're bad for their mental health. They're bad for our attention span and engagement, quite frankly. So I would just suggest that whatever we do in this focus group to really, or this task group to really look at the question, really look at that with some nuance, because I think it's a simplistic answer to say, oh, well, our kids are going to have technology, so they have to learn how to use it. I mean, even if the school ends up just creating a moral line by saying these devices are not helping anybody in terms of learning, and that might even be some encouragement to parents to get them out of their kids' rooms at night. Not that the school has any ability to navigate that. So anyway, I'm glad you're looking at that seriously. Then the next question I have is, there's some amazing stories in here, and also some that are really concerning. So given that we're just on the heels of the budget process, I think that number about the number of students who think that the school counselor is really a trusted source, I think it was like above 50%. That's pretty awesome, and that's a pretty strong argument based on the budget conversations we just came through, of making sure that those folks are resourced. So just a call out there in terms of an observation. The number, honestly, that scares me the very most in this whole thing is the fact that our engagement is 7% below the national average for the level of engagement we're looking for. Meaning, if I understood your data correctly, that the overall engagement score of looking for people who are not just going through the motions is 7% lower than the national average, which, if you're looking at, I think it was, whatever, how many number of thousands of students, you would think that that national average is a pretty weak number overall. If we're 7% below that, the urgent question I see within this is, how do we get our kids more engaged in the activity of learning? I don't have an answer for that, but that's the number that pops off the page to me that is deeply concerning. So I don't know that there's a specific question there, but boy, oh boy, does that number seem like we need to address it.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if Lucas wants to speak to that. I see him nodding, but I mean, this is frankly why we're starting with that topic on the 24th and spending a good portion of the whole morning, because what we want to better understand is like, what is getting in the way of that, but also what are some moves teachers can make to reflect on their practice, to reflect on their curriculum, to think about tweaks. What part of our approach is not to like throw everything out that we're doing or come in with a new curriculum. It's about what are some shifts that we can make individually, but then also collectively, they're going to move the needle on these items. And yes, engagement was the thing that I think jumped off the page for us as a team when we met. And that's why we're going to lead with that on the 24th.
Yeah, and Tina, just a call out to you, given that you probably know as much, if not much, much more than anybody else in this whole call about, project-based learning and things like that. But perhaps we need to be looking throughout the district in terms of what are the things we're doing to anchor learning to purpose and to mission and to the why, to help our students. Because I would imagine these things are interrelated as well. Meaning, if you feel a greater sense of purpose behind what you're learning, it doesn't feel as much of a burden and a stressor of just the massive workload, because you actually understand the why you're doing it. So anyway, I'm glad you're honing in on engagement. That seems like an incredibly crucial thing to look at.
Well,
Next question.
Chad,
Oh, sorry, Tina. Yeah, go ahead.
Just to add on, since you threw out the budget comment and talking about the importance of curriculum and design work around relevancy and alignment to purpose for kids. We've been, just shout out to all the teachers who are working so hard in the summer during the Summer Curriculum Academy. That is why that work is so important, because as we look at universal design for learning, that is where student choice, that is where engagement, that is where relevancy, that is where articulation into career paths and project-based learning through the lens of interconnected content work happens. And so it's not a flip of the switch, as you know, Chad. It does take time. And and this data will help us leverage that work and the importance around that work through your work as Board of Education members who are supporting the funds that help the teachers to be able to do that work. And the most focused, intense amount of time that we get as a community of educators is during that summer curriculum time. It's where most of the work happens and where we get most of our design work for curriculum that is grounded in everything that the data from Dr. Wiley is talking about when it comes to what the students are saying. Like, why am I doing this? What's the purpose of this work? Why can't I go into the science classroom and the literacy classroom and the social studies classroom and the math classroom and work on a project that is designed that interconnects all of those standards together, which is, as you know, a phenomenal experience for kids and for educators when it all comes together beautifully. So yes,
Yeah.
agreed.
Yeah. And I also want to say on this, look, I really applaud everybody for the bravery it takes to do this. Meaning, I'm sure that people will look at these numbers and say like, Weston's doing a terrible job, and oh my God, it's a crisis and this and that. But look, if we don't actually examine things, how can we possibly make it better? There's a lot of good news within this too. So just good job, everybody, for trying to qualitatively and quantitatively assess things beyond just test scores. I think it's wonderful. Are the teachers seeing this? And the reason I ask that is because there's those numbers on that one graph about, the number of percentage of students who say the teachers believe that I can learn or believe that everyone can learn. And some of those numbers are a little bit low. That may be some of the lower hanging fruit, which is, I imagine if teachers get educated, maybe just on some aspects of mindset and growth mindset and things like that, those could be pretty quick levers to switch. I don't know if that's true or not pedagogically. I have no idea. But simple question is, do the teachers see the deep dive on this data, and are they being educated about ways in which they could improve, hopefully pretty quickly?
So John,
Yes.
the short answer is yes, right?
Good. Okay. Yeah, great.
Brandon actually Zoomed into a faculty meeting some weeks ago, maybe months ago now, and presented the data. And what we really did, we wanted to also highlight the really good news that is in the data, right? That we do have a large proportion of our students that do feel a sense of belonging. You mentioned the counselor piece too, as a trusted adult, and those are really great. That's really great data sets for us. And we also highlighted some of the areas that we know that we want to work on. And we also know that schools nationally are working on that, right? The trends in project-based learning and high engagement student choice, grouping and regrouping strategies. And that, to Brandon's point, is the reason why we chose that Teaching for Engagement workshop on the 24th. So there's certainly work to be done. There's a lot of great news in this. And there are those small moves that, to your point too, that can really make a difference, whether it's kind of like, I know we could do this, like, let's dig in this together, and, little small things like that we think can shift the dynamic a little bit.
Okay, great. And then to ask like a really revolutionary question, and I know that can of worms I'll be opening up about this, but with the alarming data on sleep, is there a world in which, not today, but long-term, Weston wants to consider a later start time for school? And I know there's a lot of thought and research about like why schools start at the time that they do, how much sleep teenagers need, et cetera. The sleep data, by the way, is not just our kids should get more sleep. It's linked to mental health. It's linked to recovery. Long-term, it's even linked to neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and stuff like that. So the science of sleep has become a very adamant subject in the last 10 years. I don't know if folks have been paying attention to it or not, but it's a really big deal, actually, if our kids are not getting enough sleep. I recognize what a massive question that is. And also, of course, the number of days that are mandated by the district each year, by the state each year. Are there steps that the district could take to help sleep?
Dr. Henkel, if you wouldn't mind, if you go to the very last slide, actually, I can, from a national standpoint, I can say, so part of our job as a partner is to help schools and districts think about policy, practice, right? The intersection between those. So this framework that we have, the first one is this idea of supportive schedule and use of time. So yes, we do have schools around the country that are reevaluating their bell schedule, they're reevaluating their start time. They're really thinking differently about how they're using time to build in opportunity for students to get what they need, right? Sleep being one of them, but other supports being another. And you can see from the other areas we work on things like pedagogy, which is the engagement question, assessments, thinking about how do we diminish the importance of grades, but also emphasize learning as the real purpose. How do we create a climate of care within the school? So, I'll just say from a national standpoint, yes, there are schools that are definitely looking at start time, end time, bell schedule, transitions, how to embed supports within the school day, because we know kids are busy outside of the school day, and we have models that we can share. From the district perspective, I'll defer to you all to decide like what's the energy in your community. And I think that's where, Megan mentioned this earlier, one of our next steps is we want to bring this information to families, right? And so having that presentation to families and broadening the community's understanding of what kids are experiencing might mobilize or generate some different energy. And so I'll defer to you on what's possible.
I'm just going to say, I think anything is possible. I think it's a matter of preparation and communication and education and really thinking about all logistics, right? In our district, as you all know, we're a little unique because we actually basically have 2 layers or 2 levels of schedules, right? We have K-5 levels of schedule, where we're all on the same schedule, and then 6-12. But I've been in districts where we've done this work. I've been in districts that have later start times for high school. So I think anything is possible. I think we have the right people to do the work. And I think if we have the support to do the work, I think that's where the rubber meets the road. So this is exciting work. And to your point, Chad, it's one of those other pieces of not being able to just flip the switch. We just have to be thinking about all areas and aspects of the changes and how that impacts something else, because it all snowballs. And then how do we communicate and make those shifts appropriately?
Yeah. And then the final thing, and then I'll let the other board members chime in, which is I would very much like to see the deep dive on this data. So yes to the suggestion to sharing that around. Forgive me if I did not actually see it, if it already came around, but I'd love to see the full range of the data. And then I would just invite us, particularly on the topic of stress, and I'm sure the deeper dive does this, but just to tease out the different layers of stress. And here's why. As I understand it anyway, short-term stress, especially if it's anchored to skill acquisition, knowledge acquisition, growth, short-term stress is actually good.
Yes.
Depending on the parameters of it. What is destructive and terrible is long-term chronic stress that never goes away. And, to hit my bogeyman again, which is like if you're constantly in some sort of digital attention hellscape, which is what a lot of social media is, et cetera, that is sort of ramps up the chronic stress. But don't even make it about phones. It could be something different. And I invite us to really tease out what you could reductively call good stress versus bad stress, and not lump it into one bucket of like our kids are overstressed. Let's look at which is productive stress and which is not, and then therefore try to address the real challenges and not fix things that are not broken.
Yep. 100%.
So we're at 10:38 right now, and we still have one other item that Andrea and Alex are here to present on or speak to. So Lisa and David, I know you have questions also. I'm going to transition to you if that's okay.
Please, thank you.
I really like the data that you're bringing in. I think it shows both areas of celebration and weakness, and I think that especially when we talk about engagement, it really will let the staff understand where the areas of weakness are to improve the correct curriculum and instruction. And I look forward to seeing the professional development that's going to engage the staff in improving it. I mean, there are other areas where, student belonging, I thought was a concern, and some simple fixes, but it lets you know where those areas of weakness are in order to make those quick, persistent, and consistent changes. So I celebrate the data and look forward to the strategies that are going to be implemented for the students.
So I'll just jump in. I do have questions, but I think we're very short on time. So really my question is, can we bring this back to our March agenda?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, David. I was just going to say, like, this is not the last time that we'll be having the conversation, right? This was just an overview. And Chad, to your point, that I don't believe anything has been formally sent out other than maybe what Megan has sprinkled into her week ahead. And she does a great job with those. And I don't know, Chad, if you have those because you don't have any children at the high school yet. But February 24th is where the rubber meets the road, and that work is going to really start to come to life little bit more. And I know that Megan and her team would gladly come back and kind of talk about what has transpired, where are those areas of focus, because Lisa, to your point, like there's a whole bunch of data in there, right? And so you can't do everything. So the question really comes down to which are going to give us the most high leverage impact on students, and where do we want to put our energy, and where do we want to put our efforts and prioritize the work. And I think that's where they're starting, right, Megan and Lucas? That's where you guys are kind of headed with Dr. Wiley, and that's going to start on Monday. So to David's point, this was an overview. I'm happy to put it on the March agenda where we'll have some more details. Maybe even March is a little too soon. Maybe we could put it into April, give them some time to actually do some real good work after we've evolved into like, what are our priorities from those focus groups, those 6 areas. And we can really report back, because to your point, I've done student shadowing too. We need to give them some time to gather some more qualitative information around what the data is really telling us from different perspectives, right? So if you're okay with that, I'll put that to David, and we could start with you, David, in April with the questions from that presentation. What do you think?
Yeah, that's great. Let me just tell you, we don't have to get into a dialogue, since you are starting on, I guess, about 2 weeks with some action plan. The couple of things that are not so much questions. I made a whole bunch of questions and stuff, so I'll hold those till April. But just my feedback that I think might be relevant for moving forward as early as February 24th is I found it really interesting that a lot of the surveys, I think really the data kind of informs us as a district how to get parents informed and parents involved. And I do have a junior in the high school. And it's tough for any of us in this call that have kids at the high school level or have had kids at the high school level. I'm learning. I have a 4th grader as well. It's so different. The 11th grader knows better, knows everything. And it's very hard for us. He was our first to effectively communicate with him. He's a very good student. He's blessed in that he's naturally very smart. But he makes poor decisions in some ways. He goes to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, but he can just roll up and take an advanced statistics class exam and get an A, right? So it would be, I think my real takeaway is it would be really great if we can take some of this data and really educate the parents on how the parents can take the data and get actions out of their kids, where things like going to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning might not affect you academically the next morning, or you don't see it, but it has other effects throughout the course of the day. So that was the first piece, is that I think we really should look at the data and try and bridge the gap. And I believe very firmly that parenting is parenting. The school should not get involved with how kids get parented. That's not our role. But if we can give data on parents like me who are struggling with how do you effectively communicate and make a link between some of your decisions as a 16-year-old and how they impact you in your school that you can't see, that would be really helpful for me as a parent. So I'd really love to see us take this data and package it in a way that the district can help parents who I think need some help. So that's, and I think there's one other
And
item.
David, can I just, to that point, one of the areas of focus for our school, our Challenge Success team, the smaller team, is to really identify that parent communication piece, like where we need to bring parents into the conversation, but also identify kind of like some action steps for each of those stakeholder groups. Like, what do we want students to engage with in the data, and like those changes that, those moves that students can make, what can teachers do, and what can parents do, right? I'm raising a 9th and 11th grader in my own house. And sometimes what I hear from them is, can you stop principaling right now, Mom? Right? Because I have this like head of data, and I'm like, well, where are we parking the cell phones tonight? Right. And so I think that it's easier said than done. So it's easy to put it out there in the week ahead and say, hey, everyone, take your phones out of your kids' room. And I know intimately that there are battles that sometimes we have to choose. But really, I think to your point, the data can help inform those conversations, because kids are reasonable and wise. And that's one thing I know about teenagers. They are logical and reasonable. So when you present them with kind of the facts and the data, they do have the capacity to make good decisions.
Absolutely. And it also would help to push this down to WIS, because parents like me who have a child who's in 4th grade, my 16-year-old I don't want to say it's a lost cause in regards to some of these things, but in a year, for a year and a few months from now, he's done. He's going off to college. So my point being is that maybe we can help make some improvements for our parents that have kids in the high school, but we have a lot of parents who have kids in more than one kid, kids in the lower grade levels. And so things that I learn about how I could have done things differently with my 16-year-old, I can apply to my currently 9-year-old. So I don't have those struggles, right? So it's preparing me a little bit as a parent for how to make sure my current 9-year-old doesn't wind up in that same place that my 16-year-old was, just by me not having the right tools, the right knowledge, or whatever the case may be. So I just think that the school parent piece is so critical, especially with this data. And my other one other quick point is, do you do a follow-up survey to determine how effective, right? You have a point in time today. When is the next point in time that you basically ask the same questions to see what kind of results there are?
A great question. So it depends, right? So part of it depends on the motivation and the action of the school. What we'd like to see is enough time between the first and the second administration of the survey that some work has been done, some tangible work has been done that's going to move the needle. My instinct is to say that, this school should probably wait at least another full school year before they would administer the assessment again, the survey again, so that they have a full, school year to implement some of the strategies, some of the changes, some of the moves. Some schools opt to do it every single year. In this case, I don't think I would advise that, because I still think there's a lot of work to be done. You want to make sure that what you're piloting, what you're trying, is going to, get some of the movement that you need before you would collect the data again.
And is this data shared with the middle school, so that if we're talking about this gap in time, to better prepare potentially other actionable items that we can do as a district as the kids move from 8th grade to 9th grade, so that we're every night? Yeah. So is there any
As
data?
of now, the partnership is just with the high school.
Okay.
And the work that is happening in partnership with Megan and her staff is remaining at the high school. And so we can gladly talk about expanding, but as of right now, our partnership is just at the high school.
Yeah. And I was
But to
talking
the
more.
communication point, David, like we have the 8th grade transition night tonight, God
Mhm.
willing, with weather. And we will be sharing some of the data. Like we, in our advisory groups, we use the challenge success time management sheet. So it's the worksheet that asks kids to really evaluate the time that they have in their day. What are your commitments? What do you do a sport? Do you play in a symphony? Do you work? Do you have responsibilities at home to take care of your siblings, like all of those things? And so that's the same conversation that we're going to have at the transition night with 8th graders when they're choosing their schedule at the high school. So we do have those conversations, and it'll also happen again, like we have the Rising Freshman Forum, we have 9th grade orientation, as you know. So it's part of our onboarding of our new 9th grade crew.
Yeah, that's actually my question. It wasn't so much to do the
Oh.
survey at the middle school. It was actually what Megan just basically said. So the data that you have at the high school, it helps kind of inform you the conversations you're having as you move the kids from 8th grade to 9th grade. That was actually my question. So I think that's good to hear.
Great. Thank you all. So this was
Thank
Dr. Wiley. Thank you for taking the time and
pleasure.
coming
Thank you.
on and speaking to all the great work that you guys are doing at the high school. Lucas, thank you for taking the time out of the day today. I know it was kind of a rocky day. So we're going to transition, speaking of connections and involving parents in their child experience in the classroom. Our last agenda item, I'm sorry, we have to circle back because we were on a delayed schedule. Thanks, Megan.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. You're welcome to stay if you need to. Alex and Andrea are CILs for K through 5, social studies and English language arts, along with Patty Felber and Laura Cadis. They're here because, just to kind of piggyback on what we've been talking about, involving parents in the school to home partnership and making connections, right? Our Panorama survey, although we're not using Challenge Success specifically, we asked some very similar questions around belonging, mental health, rigor in the classroom, and feeling connected between what happens in the classroom and what they understand and how they can support their children at home. And one of those ways that we always do this is by bringing parents in and having conversations around curriculum in a variety of different content areas. And so Andrea and Alex, I asked them to come today to speak to what they've been doing across both Hess and WIS to support that work and hopefully build and shift some of those relationships with parents, because there was some data around last month. I talked about some of the parents wanted to be able to get more involved and figure out, really understand what happens in the classroom. So Alex and Andrea, I'm going to pull up the quick slide that you guys wanted me to share, that you guys had, the Board of Ed has prior to today. So take it away.
Okay, so I'll start quickly at the K2 level. So Alex and I created a slideshow presentation together so that we had continuity in messaging across both schools. But one of the big things that we really focused in on at the K5 level was really making sure that our families understand what the science of reading is, because a lot of what you read in the media and on social media platforms is that the science of reading is phonics, and that is only one piece of what the science of reading is. So we really did a lot of talk and work with our families, letting them know exactly what we're teaching. So we're teaching phonemic awareness, we're teaching phonics, we're explicitly teaching vocabulary, oral reading fluency, and comprehension, K5. So that was very helpful to our families. Additionally, I shared a little, kind of a little preview where the parents could see some materials and books and writing samples from a recently completed unit of study in K1 and 2. That's the bottom of the slide where you see the books down there. And they were able to kind of see the depth of what we're doing. So we talked a lot about what we're doing as far as our explicit instruction in reading, as well as our explicit instruction in writing. I did survey our families after the presentation to get some feedback from them as to what they found most helpful, what were some takeaways that they found that they're going to be implementing with their families, as well as what might be some future workshops that they would be interested in having. So some of the big buckets were that they found that the information about the programs that we're utilizing was very helpful. They also found it very helpful about how they as families can make reading fun and interactive at home. And they also enjoyed the fact that they really learned a lot about what the science of reading is and how children actually learn to read. So the majority of our parents that came were K and 1. We had K1-2 representation, but you would expect that, right? You're going to have a higher K1 grouping because honestly, this is where a lot of the new learning for them is, because for a lot of our families that attended, this was their first child in our school system. So it was really good for them to be able to spend some time learning what we're teaching and how and why. A lot of the takeaways that they had, and I'm glad they got this message, is that they need to read more with their kids at home. They need to know how to interactively read with their kids. And they said that reading to their children in an interactive and engaging way was very helpful. So we gave a lot of helpful hints on how explicitly to build vocabulary with your children. Speak to them as if they're adults, and then explain the words that you're using, and then have them practice utilizing those words in your daily conversation. We also talked about ways in which they can help support the reading comprehension for their children in order to really stretch their thinking to that inferential level where the author is not explicitly telling you something and you have to be actively thinking while you're reading. And then the last was, what did they want for future workshops? Some parents were like, all of it, we want more of it. And others were more specific, like, you know what, we touched a little on writing, but we'd like more workshop time on writing. So all fabulous feedback and a great use of our time together. So there'll be more.
Yes, and at WIS, what I have to say is actually very similar, even though we had two different workshops. We had about 20 attendees, 20 parents, which was lovely, really a nice span across all 3 grades. Our conversation was very similar to Andrea's. You know, what the science of reading is specifically related with respect to research-based literacy instruction, and how each of those components are explicitly taught and supported in our new language arts curriculum. The majority of parents in my session needed a little bit of background on why we shifted programs. And all the work, the legislation from the state and the work that the district did in terms of vetting the different approved programs and selecting the one that all of you know, But what I learned is that a lot of parents in our community are not, they didn't know about that. So that was really helpful to be able to communicate that. Our focus, you can see our agenda right there. We talked a little bit about the complex nature of reading, all the components that are involved that need to become increasingly strategic and increasingly automatic in our students. And a lot of our conversation was really it was equally about what we can do what parents can do at home to support their students, especially students for whom reading at home is a challenge for them as parents. I have one of those at home who's now, I assured parents, that student of mine is now a successful college student getting ready to graduate. So, there are ways that you can support and help your children as individuals, because we know that all our kids are different. And it was also a lot about how the nature of text and the thinking that is required of text become more complex as we get higher in the grades. There's more that texts expect of us, and there's more that we teach students in terms of really diving deep into the layered meanings of stories. This is important because it's a lot of the work, we shared the pillars. You may remember us sharing those, the 5 pillars of the science of reading. And one of the things I said was that if I had it my way, the comprehension pillar would be on top, because all the parts support comprehension at every stage. That is the end result, is us to be strong analyzers and understanders of text, not only as students, but as human beings in the world. So it really was a lively conversation. We stopped along the way to talk about, what can be done at home. We also got some feedback. We definitely got feedback that more sessions to really go in deeper with each of these components. Vocabulary was a really lively conversation, and all the ways that we can support vocabulary acquisition. I had one parent ask if it was too late. He has a student in the middle school. He said, "Is it too late?" I said, "It's never, ever, ever too late." Like the research or the theory that goes around that at some point the brain stops being able to learn new things, especially with respect to reading, is debunked science. It's not, it's never too late. Adults learn to read, become strong readers. And as parents, we can always do things to support our students. And so going in deeper with some of those components at future workshops was a request, as well as perhaps offering a workshop at night, because there are working parents that can't always come during the day, and it's valuable information across the board. So
Alex, were these recorded at all? I can't remember what we
so
did.
mine, it was not recorded live. I did afterwards, I recorded my slideshow, and it's on the WIS Reading website. And Patty also sent out the link to that recording in this week's parent email. So that's gone out for all parents who were unable to attend.
Perfect. That was a piece of feedback from all parent sessions, is whether or not we could try to build a repository of some of these sessions over time, whether it be a voiceover like Alex was just talking about, or a live recording, because the feedback from the parents was that these were just great strategies to help them take away with them as they went. I also believe you gave a cheat sheet. You guys gave cheat sheets, like a maybe last year you did that too. It was like, a quick 1-pager that said, here are some strategies to take away with you if you
yes,
read.
there was ours were slightly different just because it's different K2 and 3-5. But yes, there was a handout related to just some things you can do at home, not even just at home, but out in the world. And each year I record a back to school night video that is also on my website, that is about the importance of reading at home and why it's really important that kids don't skip that reading every night. You just had this whole beautiful presentation about how busy our kids are and how the time as they get older gets less and less. And it's really prioritizing what's important in the day and when in the day it happens.
And just to piggyback on that, my voiceover is not complete. It will be done and posted after vacation.
That's great.
It's been
No,
a
that's
busy
great.
couple of weeks.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think the other piece of these informational sessions across the content areas are fantastic. Sometimes parents want to have more individual conversations. And so what happens in that vein that's coming up that they might want to be aware of or be reminded of, I should say?
Well, at the end of the workshop, there were some parents that did hang back and they wanted questioning. They had some specific questions in regard to their own children. So there are follow-ups that we do with those families that have specific questions related to just their children. So those have happened.
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry.
Yes, go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, Tina, we also have coming up K-5, we have our March family conferences just
Right.
Coming up.
That's where I was going.
Mid-March, we're going to have our parent conferences. Teachers will be sending out schedules for parents to sign up for those very soon. So
yes, absolutely. I wanted to encourage the fact that while we always welcome conversations for parents through the CIL lens, however, it's always a much more rich and robust conversation when a teacher can actually pull student work and actually demonstrate some of what we're talking about in those meetings so that there really is a full connection between what we're teaching in the classroom and then how the students are performing or responding to that learning. So thank you for giving that quick little fill. Yep. Alex?
Yes, and just to add on, that was also some feedback that we got was were not even feedback, it was questions related to what parts of students' reading growth and progress are shared at conferences. And so that's something that moving into March conferences, we're meeting with all teachers just to work through that. It is, and again, just to, I know you all know this, but this was a point of conversation for our teachers at WIS. This is all brand new. It's still new. It's still a learning curve. And teachers are really wrapping their arms around it. They're doing a fabulous job. So it's a work in progress.
Yes, and I would just add that to the challenge success conversation about balancing quantitative assessments with qualitative student work and survey type questions, we leverage that all the time, right? And the conferencing is where that really kind of happens the most, where teachers are helping unpack some of the assessment data, whether that be through ERLA or DIBELS or NWEA, and coupling that conversation with actual physical student work, because sometimes the data doesn't tell you enough. And so how do we unpack that a little bit more clearly? So thank you both for putting all this together. We're at 11:03 right now. I know there's always more to come and there's a lot of work happening that you guys are overseeing right now in the school. So I want to let you go and thank you for hanging in there. Our challenge success presentation went over a little bit more, but you guys are doing a great job. And February 24th, just to wrap it up, February 24th is our full Board of Education meeting. The final update is that we have our mid-year snapshot presentation where we will talk about our mid-year progress relative to a variety of quantitative and qualitative actions with our district and our school improvement plans. And that will, all of us will, not all of you, Alex or Andrea, but Laura, Patty, and I will, and Megan and Dan will be on the call with Lisa and other members of central office to kind of talk through where we are, where we're headed, and some of the areas of celebration and some of the areas that we still want to focus on for the second half of the year. And that's it for us.
All right. So thank you very much, especially for everyone staying late. It seems like we always get into a good conversation, and then before we know it, we're way over time. But we have a good time, and the information is really helpful. So, all right. So then, if there's nothing else to discuss, I'd like to get a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, I'll second that. Thank you, everybody. We will see most of you or some of you on the 24th and the rest of you next month.
Have a great week if you're off.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Okay, bye.